It was a lot of emotions that I've never felt before, and it was strange to have so much emotion for someone that you've never met. But when you listen to the story, hear the story, how could you not?
Stories That Live in Us is a podcast that inspires you to form deep connections with your family, past, present, and future. I'm Krista Cowan, known online as the Barefoot Genealogist. I've spent my whole life discovering the power of family history, and I know that sharing the stories that live in you can change everything. On March 3rd, 1865, the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands was created and instituted in 15 southern states at the end of the Civil War. Now, the purpose of the Freedmen's Bureau was to direct provisions, clothing, and fuel for the immediate and temporary shelter and supply of destitute and suffering refugees and freedmen and their wives and children. Basically, it was the first of the U.S. social services at a time when this country desperately needed help rebuilding, and there were people who needed education, they needed medical services, they needed provisions, refugee camps needed to be coordinated, people needed to find jobs. All of that were services that the Freedmen's Bureau provided. The Freedmen's Bureau also served a little bit as a connecting force for those who had just been emancipated from slavery to reconnect with their families. And so one of the things that you sometimes find in Freedmen's Bureau records are letters. Ancestry had the opportunity to publish some of the Freedmen's Bureau records online. And when those records were being placed online, a team of researchers at Ancestry was digging into the records to understand them, trying to figure out what existed. And one of the things that came to light was one of those letters. This letter was from a man by the name of Hawkins Wilson. He was enslaved in the state of Texas, but he had been born back east. And in this letter, he wrote to the Freedmen's Bureau, asking them to deliver another letter written to his sister about connecting with this family that he had been sold away from as a child. In the process of uncovering this letter and realizing that this letter was actually kind of famous in and of itself. It had been used in universities. It had been used by the National Archives in explaining what records existed in the Freedmen's Bureau collection. But one of the things that had never been done was identifying the descendants of Hawkins Wilson and also finding out if that letter had ever made its way to his sister, if her descendants knew that it existed. And so we at Ancestry undertook a more than a year-long project trying to make some of those connections and answer some of those questions. Today on the podcast, I am joined by Kelley Dixon-Tealer and her mother, Marie Jenkins. Kelley and Miss Marie are descendants of Hawkins Wilson. And they were part of a documentary film project that we got to work on at Ancestry that tells the story of Hawkins and enables Kelley and Miss Marie to tell their stories. And so I wanted to invite them on the podcast so that we could have a little bit of a behind the scenes look at that documentary film and also get the rest of the story. If you would like to watch the film before listening to this episode or after, just click through to the show notes. We'll have a link there. The film is called Dream Delivered: The Lost Letters of Hawkins Wilson. Kelley, Miss Marie, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to dive in and talk about this story and this journey with you. Kelley, you are the one, as I understand it, that very first started exploring your family history. Do you want to tell us a little bit about why you chose to do that, what that beginning part of that journey was like for you?
Sure, and thank you guys for talking to us. I'm just so giddy about it. I couldn't sleep last night, but because I wanted to continue the legacy or learn more about my grandparents of side of the family. My grandparents were like second parents to all of the grandchildren. And, I just wanted to learn more about them. And when my grandfather was alive, that's kind of what spearheaded all of this. Is when he was alive, he had told us, about his upbringing and his original last name. And I go, wow, okay. So I started taking notes, and, trying to do a deep dive. And, once he died, again, just to really learn more about that side of the family. And thanks to Ancestry, I have learned some things about it. So I'm so excited.
Yeah. So what inspired you to start the tree was just these stories and this information from your grandfather?
Yes, that's correct. And just so, I guess we're clear and know that my grandfather, it's the story of Hawkins is really from my grandmother's side. So I dove in wanting to learn more about my grandfather's side of the family. And that's an interesting side as well. But what we learned was actually from my grandmother. So I kind of got two treats in one.
Right? And Miss Marie, like, were you supportive of this? Were you a little bit cautious about her exploring the family history?
I wasn't cautious at all. I was excited that she, wanted to know more, about the family. I only knew what my dad, which is her grandfather that she's speaking of, about his side of the family, because we used to visit his family every summer in Shreveport, Louisiana, which I hated it. Didn't like going there. But anyway, and then other information that we found out from my mother. But I was excited that Kelley was, she wanted to really dive in to finding out about the family.
Fantastic. I love that. And so you started a tree, and unbeknownst to you, in the background, there was some forces conspiring to deliver family history information to you based on that little family tree that you had started. Tell us a little bit about the experience of being contacted by Ancestry and this whole unfolding of Hawkins' story.
Well, it's funny, and I recall telling this story to an audience last year that I believe you guys tried to contact me through the portal of Ancestry, the messaging part of it, and I thought it was spam, so I ignored it. And I believe there was email sent, and I ignored it. And I believe there was a either a message, and I don't know if this is before or after, but I recall seeing it. Someone from Ancestry contacted me or looking me up on LinkedIn, and I ignored it. And so I got a FedEx letter from Ancestry, and I read it, and it was like, this is interesting. My family's name is on here, and I did recognize the names that was in the letter, but I put it up and walked away from it. And one day, I never checked my email. I never checked my voicemail. And one day I decided to check the voicemail, and it was a message from Ancestry. And I go, that name sounds familiar. So I ran and grabbed the letter, and it was the same name as the person who was on the voicemail. And I called back, and the rest is history.
I love that. I didn't know all of those details. There was something at work there to make sure that we got your attention, wasn't there?
Yes.
And maybe it was Hawkins, right? Maybe his legacy and the importance of the story that he wanted told, and that he wanted you to be a part of that. I think there's something to that, maybe.
Mm. Now I'm getting emotional just even hearing that part again, because I do know that other people were contacted. And it was me who finally said, let me just give them a call. Once I talked to Lisa and, listened to everything she had to say, and then I did more research and she gave me, information to research, I was like, okay, game on. And I'm ready. So I am so honored to be here, to be on this platform, to continue to tell his story. It's So beautiful.
If people haven't watched the film, Kelley, could you, in just like a few sentences, just give us a rundown of exactly who Hawkins is and his story briefly?
Sure. Hawkins Wilson was an enslaved man who was set free June 19th, 1865. Hawkins was in Virginia as a 6-year-old boy, sold because of landowners couldn't keep up with their debt. So from Virginia to Texas, Hawkins was here in a search of his family members. For 155 years, we could not connect with his letters, with his family members. But because Hawkins is a persistent individual, he was able to write letters to the Freedmen's Bureau in search of his loved ones. And 155 years later, we were able to make that connection for Hawkins Wilson.
His story itself is so powerful. But Miss Marie, I would just love to hear in your own words, if you had to tell Hawkins' story in just a few minutes, how would you share that?
It's kind of hard to put myself, in his place since he was basically a child, when he was separated from his family, and me being a child that was, close to my parents. I just could not imagine, being separated from them, at such a young age. And I don't even want to imagine that, being separated. So I'm sure it was devastating to him, it was devastating to his family, as it would be devastating to me, to be separated, from my family, because we were close knit family. We lived next door, to my grandparents, Hawkins family. And so we all, the cousins, it was six of us and seven of them. It was 13 grandchildren. And we lived, right next door. And to be separated from them at a young age, I would be devastated and wouldn't know where my life would be today if that had happened to me. I
Yeah.
don't know if I could have done what he did.
So Kelley, tell us a little bit about what he did and where he ended up and a little bit about the letters.
Yes, I'm emotional.
Me
I think my
too.
mom did it. I think my so Hawkins is a man that pressed on in spite of. I am still trying to figure out that gap between the age of 6 and when he wrote his letters. I would assume, I think he was maybe in his 30s. I forget the age right now. Um, but in his mind, he probably retraced, his upbringing and the love that he had. And going off of everything my mother said, I would think that he, day in, day out, pictured that. But most importantly is that throughout that time period, Hawkins stayed close to God and made sure that that was in the center of him. And when that opportunity came, and he wrote those letters to see where he was, right? This is a young boy, 6 years old, pulled from his family, but yet have thousands that follow him. It's amazing, right? And then to be a minister that traveled, I don't know everywhere that he traveled. I'll just say probably all the South, maybe parts of the U.S. But to have that magnitude that you did not allow what happened to you to hold you down or hold you back, he pressed on. And to me, that is just such a beautiful story of someone that, despite everything that's happened to him, he pressed on. And I'm honored to have learned that and to see that about him.
Yeah, he's such a remarkable man. And when we learned his story at Ancestry, um, Lisa was so captivated by it, by the whole story of the whole concept of these letters that he had written, trying to find his family, trying to reach out and make that connection and bridge that gap, that she went on a more than a year-long search with several other genealogists, trying to find descendants of his, trying to find descendants of his family. She reached out and connected with you, as you've explained, But then she also reached out and was able to connect with some descendants of his other relatives, and you had the opportunity to meet them. Miss Marie, what was that moment like when you walked up and met those other descendants of Hawkins family?
I was extremely, emotional, to find family, to be able to, well, Ancestry found family that we never knew, it existed. And I was emotional. I was excited. I was really happy, to meet them. And they're still in our lives. So I'm grateful to Ancestry. I'm grateful to the Lord that He's bringing my family together.
Yeah, that concept of gathering and connecting is something that is so important to me, and I can hear that it's important to you as well. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. So then, Kelley, like since you've had that experience, since you've learned this information, it sounds to me like you've continued to dig to learn more about him and about his legacy.
When Ancestry talked to me about Hawkins and that Hawkins died here in Houston in the historic Fourth Ward area of Houston, there is a tour for Ford here. So I reached out to that group of people, that genealogist, and I'm getting emotional. So she called back and said, "Oh, you, I've heard your story. Um, yeah, let's meet, let's talk." And we talked and we spent hours on the phone together. And she said, "I would love to do what Ancestry did for you, but here in Houston." And so they basically redone some research and found out about Hawkins' son Osborne, Cyrilla Hawkins' daughter, and where they lived, and the different addresses that are found, on in Ancestry through the census. So she marked them and saved them. And I met them over in that area and we walked and I stood on the land where Hawkins lived. I stood on the land where Osborne taught school. Um, Again, I frequent these places often and would have never known that my family was there, right? And so that same day, we went to the gravesite, Olivewood, and it is known that Cyrilla, Hawkins' daughter, is buried there, but not 100% known if that's where Hawkins is. But everyone, they was like, "No, I know he's here." And the moment that I stepped foot on that graveyard, number one, I hate graveyards. Like, what am I doing? That's number one. But I went and I stepped foot on that graveyard. It's almost like I was embraced with love. From even the groundkeeper. He was almost like family members. It was again that emotion, those words that I really just can't fully articulate. But to know that I am here where my ancestors lie, that I never knew exist, is beyond words for me. And to have this group of people take on this story with me, they took on the story, they took on the emotions. Like we were all like a hot mess and just crying and just telling the story and just talking through it. It was one of the most beautiful experiences. It was a lot of emotions that I've never felt before. And it was strange to have so much emotion for someone that you've never met. But when you listen to the story and hear the story, how could you not? I have a picture of his letters and then myself with the letters. When we last year we were able to speak about this at the Holocaust Museum, and part of my dream for him is to continue his legacy, but to also have his letters displayed here in Houston. in a museum. So part of that had come true. So I am trying to continue his legacy by continuing his story, but also I'm wanting to. I'm in the it's in its infant stage, and unfortunately, last year I kind of had to put a pause because I was overwhelmed with tasks with different things going on in life. But I started up a nonprofit in his name to continue his legacy and to give scholarships to students that want to pursue history and that have like community service hours. So his name, his legacy can continue on, beyond just when we announced everything a couple years ago.
So if people want to know more about that, if they want to contribute in any way, how do we find out more?
Sure. It's hawkinswilsonslegacy.com.
Wow, that's amazing. And what a legacy, both for both of you. That's
Yeah.
incredible. Miss Marie, Hawkins was connected with Galveston, and I understand not only during the filming of the movie, but also since then you've been able to visit Galveston and connect with him in that place. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
That was really, really exciting, and to stand on the beach, to look out at at the waters and imagine that slave ship coming to Galveston, and so it's sort of part of it was a little bit of anger, but part of it was extremely, emotional that a baby, had to go through that. But then he, as Kelley was saying, as he grew, obviously the Lord had put him with good people because he started started a ministry. He was part of a church there, and he had many followers. And so just to look back on that, and we had an opportunity to go to Galveston on Juneteenth. Was it last year, Kelley? That
Juneteenth
we
last year.
Juneteenth of last year, and I'll let Kelley finish that part. But it's just just exciting because we didn't know that he started in Virginia, but then ended up in Texas and Galveston.
Kelley, do tell the rest of the story.
Yes, I will. So Hawkins was a superstar and we didn't even know it.
Yeah.
Um, I connected with a genealogist. It's funny, I was trying to be so humble about, hey, I was on Ancestry. Didn't you see me? I was on CBS. But I was really trying to be humble with my approach to the genealogist here in Houston who connected me with genealogists in Galveston. And I was able to first here in Houston trace some of his steps, the most beautiful, his steps and his children. That was the most beautiful experience I could ever imagine. I cried the whole time. But so the genealogist in Galveston invited us to Reedy Chapel, the birthplace of Juneteenth. And she was like, Hawkins was the first. I've known about Hawkins. I too have been trying to find Hawkins' descendants. We have all these articles on Hawkins. And would you please come to our Juneteenth celebration and be the keynote speaker on this? And to be able to, and we walked the path of the for when they gave the order that the slaves were free. So we did that. The most beautiful experience you could ever imagine, being able to trace the footsteps of your ancestor and then knowing that he too was part of the very first Juneteenth. I am 49 years old, 48 at the time, and never knew that he had that much impact on that amount of people, but yet part of part of a Texas history that we celebrated that I never knew that my third great grandfather was part of. I mean,
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I think all of us have these stories in our past of people who persevered and survived and made an impact in the world, however big or small. And that lives in us, but we don't always recognize it. And so when we start on this journey of discovery to uncovering those stories, tell me a little bit, Kelley, about how that's changed your perception of yourself and your place in the world.
wow, so much that No closed door will ever stop me from progressing forward. I shared this story with my mother, but I also it helps me think of maybe some of the trials that Hawkins may have gone through. I was recently in a graduate program, and its one course was kicking my butt, and I quit like several times, Mom. I think mentally, I was like, I can't do this. I can't. And I'm tired. Like, I don't even know why I'm doing this. This is just so unnecessary, right? But think about Hawkins, of how many times like hurdles or barriers came in his way where he probably thought he couldn't progress, right? I thought he couldn't make an impact, but he pressed on in spite of. And that was some of the things that I was like, I can do this. I know I can do it. And I prayed and I pressed in and I did it and I'm done. And now I have my graduate degree. So the same with him, right? I use those stories to parallel my own life, because I know that he had struggles, and as he stated in his letters, that times were hard. But here I am today, right? And I look at some of the things that I've done over, my years, and I pressed on. And here I am today, leaving that mark, leaving that legacy, and I'm just trying to be like Hawkins. No, but better, but better.
I love that. That's beautiful. And what a great opportunity to use that story and move forward in your life. Thank you for sharing that. Miss Marie, you're a woman of faith. And I've heard some beautiful things from Lisa about your faith and your expressions of faith. How has your faith been strengthened, or how has your outlook on faith changed since learning more about Hawkins and the fact that he was also a man of faith?
I often wondered, when I came to the Lord, I came to the Lord. People sometimes can be kind of hard headed and want to live their own life the way they want to live their life. So I did that at the beginning, and so I made things hard for myself. And then finally, I just gave in, just gave up. Said, Lord, okay, my life is yours. I give myself to you. And so, but as I progressed in my walk with the Lord, I often wondered, because I mean, my family, they were they believed in God and they believed in the Lord Jesus Christ, but it was never a life where it was really expressed in our day-to-day life. So I often wondered, how did why did the Lord pick me to be the first one, in my family, one that was afraid of, or really afraid of my own shadow, you know. And then to learn this story about Hawkins, that he was a man of faith, then I said, now I understand. I'm continuing something that he started. And, he was a man of faith, and he was a strong man of faith. And I wanted, because as I said, I was afraid of my own shadow and would barely talk to people. But then there was a boldness that came in me where, I would talk to you about the Lord, whether you want to hear about him, or not. But and I, became a ordained minister, which I'm not really doing that now, but I'm still vocal for my, for my faith. But I was thinking the other day that we mentioned that my son is a minister, but I forgot that there were other ministers in my family. My One of my cousins in California, her son was an ordained minister. He's deceased now, and I only met him once. It was when my grandmother passed away, and they all came to Houston. But he was a man of faith. Then I have another cousin whose son is a minister even today. He's been a minister for 25 years. So the legacy of Hawkins is weaved through all of my family, and we didn't know that it began with him.
Mhm.
Wow, that's amazing. There's something about family narrative that has always been fascinating to me, this idea that these threads of story get passed down, sometimes consciously, sometimes maybe even unconsciously, and that they start to weave together, and that we can step back just enough, you can see the pattern of it. That
Yeah.
this, and it sounds like that's what's happened with the faith of Hawkins, as it has come down in threads in different branches of his family tree. And now you have the opportunity, because you know his story, to step back and look at that and see the pattern so clearly. Now that you're kind of in retrospect, Kelley, thinking back to that first little family tree you started on Ancestry, right? Like back then, you kind of had this idea of what you wanted, but now knowing where that journey took you, do you have advice for other people as they're involved in family history, or how people should approach this?
This journey all started because one, I was curious. And it all started from a conversation, and then taking conversation with my grandfather, and then taking that and jotted it on notes. But then of course, it all really stemmed from a tree, from Ancestry. And I built on that tree and then would step away and came back. So I was able to make these beautiful connections through Ancestry, through, my third great grandfather. And you can't make these connections if you don't start, right? Start that conversation, start taking notes, but most importantly, you should invest in, your family by starting that family tree.
Yeah, it is a journey. It's not a destination by any means, that we
Mhm.
just arrive at this fully formed, fully discovered family tree. But the process of making those discoveries is, I think, part of the process of internalizing those stories and figuring out how we use them to move forward. It's also the process of how we make those connections, right? I think back to that beautiful moment in the film where you and your new cousins met at that church and had that opportunity to make that connection. And then you've mentioned that you've continued those relationships. What does that look like?
I still talk to both cousin Linda and cousin Val. Last year, some of this year, I've spent some time with cousin Linda. I took vacation, not vacation, it was kind of like work, some vacation to the Virginia area. So I was able to, connect with her. And we continue to talk through text messaging, especially around the holidays. But even going, beyond them, I'm still looking for relatives and uncovered new relatives, from my grandfather's side. So it's definitely, again, a journey, as you stated, just trying to, one, get people to respond, without seeming like a weirdo, like, hey, it's your new cousin. But so it's a test and a journey to continue to, bring new relatives to the forefront of all of this.
So, what I'm hearing you say is people should read and respond to their ancestry messages, Kelley.
Please, yes. I stalk people on Facebook. I'm like, should I? Is this weird? But I hadn't reached out on Facebook.
Right. I love that. Well, Miss Marie, if you could hope one thing for the future, knowing what you now know about Hawkins and his story and some of the other discoveries that y'all have been able to make through this journey, what is that hope for the future of your family?
Well, my hope is that we will stay connected because if we remember Hawkins, he was separated from his family and he was not able to connect with any of them. So he started, his own family. So my hope is that, with this younger generation, that they would want to stay together and not lose contact, with family. Because family is important.
That was beautifully said. Thank you. Kelley, what about you? What's your hope now that you have this knowledge, now that you have these stories? What's your hope for the future for your family?
Well, I think my mother said it all, and but also, hoping to continue his legacy, and if that is through, the connection of family or continuing his name. But so it's one of those, or it's both of those, not one of those, it's both of those. Staying connected as a family, but also how can we continue to say his name and continue his legacy beyond where it is today. So
I love that. Thank you. Thank you both so much for being here, for spending time with me, for sharing your perspective on the whole beautiful saga of Hawkins Wilson's life and his legacy. You represent him beautifully. Thank you.